Spiritual discernment is vital because not everything that seems good is from God, and not everyone who speaks into your life is led by the Spirit of truth. The Bible cautions that false prophets, deceptive voices, and even the enemy himself can masquerade as an angel of light. Without discernment, a person can easily be led astray, manipulated, or deceived by forces that are working against God's will. There are individuals in this world who carry spirits that are not of God. They may appear harmless, even use religious language, but their words and actions are rooted in confusion, manipulation, and destruction. Some of them do not even realize they are being used by the enemy, but whether they are aware of it or not, their influence can pull you away from the truth. That is why spiritual discernment is not optional, it is essential. When Jesus walked on earth, he met people who outwardly seemed righteous, yet inwardly were full of wickedness. The Pharisees knew the scriptures, they adhered to religious customs, but their hearts were distant from God. Jesus did not waste time explaining himself to them. He understood their motives, saw through their words, and discerned the spirit behind their accusations. This is the wisdom believers need today. Not everyone who questions you is searching for the truth. Some are merely looking for ways to entrap you, to cause doubt, and to stir confusion in your spirit. Without discernment, you may find yourself constantly defending your faith, justifying your actions, and trying to prove yourself to those who have no intention of understanding. Discernment comes from walking in close relationship with God. It is not something that comes from intellect alone, nor can it be obtained just through experience. It is a spiritual gift, and it grows as you spend time in prayer, in the Word, and in God's presence. The more you align yourself with God's Spirit, the more you will recognize when something is amiss. You will feel it in your spirit. When a conversation is meant to draw you into unnecessary conflict, you will sense it when someone's words are filled with deception. You will be able to tell when the enemy is trying to use someone to weaken your faith. Many believers fall into the trap of trying to reason with spirits that have already rejected the truth. They engage in endless debates, hoping that logic will change a heart that has become hardened. But the enemy does not work through logic, he works through deception. No amount of explanation will convince someone whose spirit is closed off to God. That is why Jesus warned against casting pearls before swine. It is not because the truth is not precious, but because those who refuse to accept it will only trample on it and turn against you. The enemy wants you to waste your time arguing with people who have no intention of hearing the truth. He seeks to distract you, to frustrate you, and to deplete your energy. But God has called you to walk in wisdom. There is a time to speak, and there is a time to remain silent. There is a time to share the truth, and there is a time to step away. When Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, he did not engage with the devil's questions. He responded with the Word of God, and he moved forward. He did not linger. He did not explain himself, and he did not attempt to convince the enemy of his identity. This is the example believers are called to follow. You do not owe an explanation to those who are being used to distract and deceive. Your responsibility is to walk in truth, to stand firm in faith, and to listen to God's voice above all other. If you do not develop discernment, you will find yourself caught in unnecessary conflicts, wasting your energy on people who do not wish to see the light. But when you walk in discernment, you will be able to recognize the tactics of the enemy and refuse to engage in fruitless conversations. Some of the greatest attacks against your faith will not come from obvious enemies, but from those who seem well-intentioned. They will approach you with kind words, deep questions, and flattering speech. yet their spirit will be opposed to God's truth. This is why discernment is crucial. It guards you from deception, prevents unnecessary conflict, and helps you stay focused on the path that God has set before you. The Bible tells us to test every spirit, to weigh every word, and to measure everything by the truth of God's word. It does not say to accept everything at face value. There will be voices that attempt to lead you astray, voices that will make you doubt what God has spoken to you. But when you have discernment, you will recognize what is from God and what is not. You will not be easily shaken, you will not be easily deceived, and you will not waste time trying to explain yourself to spirits that have already rejected the truth. Jesus faced opposition from the moment he began his ministry. Though he came with a message of love, salvation, and truth, there were those who rejected him, challenged him, and sought to destroy him. The religious leaders of his time, men who were supposed to represent God, became his greatest enemies. They could not deny his miracles. They could not disprove his wisdom. But their hearts were hardened and they refused to believe. They tested him with trick questions, hoping he would say something they could use against him. They accused him of blasphemy, of lawlessness, and of being possessed by demons. No matter what he did, no matter how clearly he revealed the truth, they opposed him at every turn. Jesus understood that some people were not searching for the truth. He knew that no amount of explanation would satisfy those who had already decided to reject him. When the Pharisees demanded a sign, he refused to perform miracles just to prove himself. When they questioned his authority, he did not argue with them. He spoke the truth boldly, but he did not waste time explaining himself to those who had no desire to listen. Even when he stood before Pilate, falsely accused and sentenced to death, he remained silent. He could have defended himself. He could have called legions of angels to rescue him, but he knew his purpose. He understood that opposition was a part of the path he was meant to walk. The opposition against Jesus did not only come from religious leaders, it came from his own people, the very ones he came to save. They rejected him. They praised him when he performed miracles, but they turned against him when he spoke hard truths. When he fed the 5,000, they followed him eagerly. But when he told them that he was the bread of life, many turned away. The same crowd that shouted Hosanna as he entered Jerusalem later cried out, "Crucify him!" Their loyalty was shallow, their faith fleeting, and when given a choice, they chose Barabbas over the Son of God. Even those closest to Jesus struggled to stand by him. Peter, the disciple who declared he would never deny Christ, denied him 3 times in one night. Judas, one of the 12, betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. When Jesus was arrested, his disciples scattered in fear. He stood alone before his accusers, facing the hatred of men who should have recognized him as the Messiah. Yet, in the face of all this opposition, he did not waver. He did not alter his message to please the crowds. He did not back down to avoid conflict. He did not soften the truth to make it more palatable. He remained faithful to his mission, knowing that the rejection of men could not alter the truth of God. Opposition did not prevent Jesus from fulfilling his purpose. He healed on the Sabbath, even when the religious leaders condemned him for it. He spoke to sinners and outcasts, even when it tarnished his reputation among the self-righteous. He preached against hypocrisy, even when it made powerful enemies. He knew that standing for the truth would bring resistance. He knew that people would hate him, misunderstand him, twist his words, and falsely accuse him. But he never allowed opposition to silence him. Jesus warned his followers that they too would face opposition. He said, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. He knew that the same forces that worked against him would work against those who follow him. The enemy does not target those who walk in darkness. He goes after those who bear the light. If Jesus, who was flawless, who embodied love itself, and who performed miracles in broad daylight, faced rejection and opposition, how much more will his followers face the same? The opposition against Jesus was not evidence that he was wrong. It was proof that he was right. The darkness does not accept the light. The enemy does not embrace the truth. Those who find comfort in sin do not rejoice when righteousness is made known. That is why those who lived in darkness despised him. That is why those with hardened hearts resisted him. That is why the world still tries to silence his name today. The opposition Jesus encountered did not define him, nor did it stop him. He knew who he was. He knew his purpose. He understood that no amount of resistance could change the truth. He walked through opposition with authority, confidence, and unwavering faith. He did not waste time explaining himself to those who refused to see. He did not seek validation from those who would never grant it. He remained on the path that God had set for him, knowing that no opposition could hinder what God had already planned. Not every battle is yours to fight. There are moments when people will challenge you, question you, provoke you, and attempt to drag you into conflicts that have nothing to do with your purpose. Some arguments are meant to drain you, not to enlighten you. Some confrontations aim to pull you off course, not to build you up. The enemy knows that if he can keep you engaged in unnecessary battles, he can keep you distracted from the real war. He doesn't always attack in obvious ways. Sometimes he simply places people and situations in your path that demand your time, your peace, and your attention, knowing that if he can get you to engage, he can get you to lose focus. Jesus understood this better than anyone. He was constantly surrounded by people trying to entrap him with questions, trying to stir division, trying to provoke him into responding in ways that would give them an excuse to accuse him. The Pharisees came to him repeatedly, hoping to trap him in his words, questioning him about taxes, the law, and authority. He answered them when it served his purpose, but he never allowed their challenges to pull him into unnecessary disputes. He did not engage in every battle presented to him. He chose his battles wisely because he understood that not every conflict was worth his time. When Jesus stood before Pilate, falsely accused and on trial for his life, he did not argue. He did not defend himself against the lies spoken against him. He understood that the battle was not his to fight, it belonged to God. He could have called legions of angels. He could have spoken in such a way that no one could have refuted him, but he remained silent because he knew that the greater victory was in surrendering to the will of God rather than engaging in a fight that would not change the outcome. Many believers waste their strength on battles that do not matter. They spend time defending themselves against those who will never believe them. They argue with people who have no desire to hear the truth. They try to explain themselves to those who are committed to misunderstanding them. They fight for approval from people who will never give it. They allow their emotions to be stirred by every insult, every false accusation, every attack that comes their way, forgetting that some battles are meant to be ignored. At times the enemy will use people to provoke you, not because the argument itself matters, but because he knows that if he can get you emotionally involved, he can pull you off course. He will use small offenses to create division. He will use personal attacks to stir up bitterness. He will use lies to make you feel the need to defend yourself. But not every accusation needs a response. Not every insult requires a reaction. Not every challenge demands an answer. There are moments when the best choice is to remain silent and let God handle the battle. David understood this when he faced Goliath. His brothers mocked him. The soldiers doubted him. Even King Saul questioned him. He could have spent time arguing with them, trying to prove his capability, but instead he focused on the real enemy. He ignored the distractions and went straight to the battle that mattered. And because he did not waste his energy on unnecessary conflicts, he had the strength to defeat the giant that no one else could face. There will always be people who try to pull you into their battle. They will try to make you prove yourself. They will question your motives, your faith, your calling. They will stir up confusion and strife, hoping you will take the bait. But wisdom teaches us that strength is not found in fighting every battle. It is found in knowing which battles are worth fighting. The enemy will love nothing more than to see you spend your life fighting distractions, neglecting the real purpose that God has assigned to you. Some battles are meant to be left in God's hands. Some conflicts are meant to test your patience, not your strength. Some attacks are meant to be endured, not engaged. The greatest victories are not always achieved through struggle, but through surrender to God's plan. The moment you recognize that not every battle is yours to fight, you free yourself from the weight of unnecessary conflict and step into the power of divine wisdom. Faith over explanation means standing firm in your beliefs without feeling the need to justify yourself to those who will never comprehend. Faith does not rely on the approval of others. It does not seek validation from the world. It does not beg for acceptance. When God speaks, when he moves in your life, when he guides you along a path that others do not understand, faith teaches you to walk forward without stopping to explain yourself to those who choose not to see. One of the greatest examples of faith over explanation is Abraham. God instructed him to leave his country, his people, and everything familiar to go to a land that he would reveal. There was no map, no detailed plan, no proof of what was to come, just a command from God. Abraham could have argued, demanded answers, or sought validation from others before stepping out, but he didn't. He walked by faith, not by sight. He didn't waste time explaining himself to those who would have called him foolish. He moved forward because he trusted that God's word was enough. The world operates on reason, logic, and tangible evidence. Faith operates on trust in the unseen. That is why those who live by faith will always be misunderstood by those who live by sight. Noah was mocked for building the ark when there was no sign of rain. Moses was doubted when he told Pharaoh that God would deliver his people. Even Jesus was ridiculed for declaring himself the Son of God. Time and time again, history shows that those who follow God's voice will always be questioned by those who cannot hear it. But faith does not need an explanation. Faith moves forward even when others doubt, even when they laugh, even when they call you crazy. Jesus never felt the need to explain himself to those who were spiritually blind. When the Pharisees demanded a sign, he did not give them one. When the religious leaders questioned his authority, he did not try to prove himself. He spoke the truth and allowed those who were willing to hear to receive it. He knew that no amount of explanation would convince those whose hearts were already hardened. That is the wisdom of faith. It does not waste time trying to persuade those who have already chosen unbelief. Too many people spend their lives trying to explain what God has spoken to them. They want their family to understand, their friends to agree, their critics to accept their choices. They feel the need to justify every step, to provide proof before moving, to gain approval before obeying. But faith does not wait for permission. Faith follows God even when no one else understands. Faith does not argue with those who will never see. Faith does not plead for acceptance from those who have already rejected the truth. When Peter stepped out of the boat to walk on water, he did not stop to explain his decision to the other disciples. He did not wait for their approval. He did not ask them if they thought it was a good idea. He simply stepped out because Jesus had called him. The moment he focused on the wind and the waves, the voices of doubt, the opinions of others, and the logic of his mind, that is what happens when faith is replaced with explanation. When you try to justify your actions instead of simply following through, you allow doubt to take root. Faith will always be tested by those who do not have it. The enemy will use people to make you question what God has spoken, to make you feel the need to explain yourself. But faith is not a debate. Faith does not ask for permission. Faith does not follow human logic. When God calls, faith obeys. When God speaks, faith moves. Faith does not need an explanation because the only approval that matters is God's. Spiritual attacks often come through people not because they are the direct source of the attack, but because the enemy uses them as instruments to carry out his plans. The Bible tells us that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and against the rulers of darkness in this world. This means that the true battle is not with the people who hurt you, lie about you, betray you, or try to destroy you. The real battle is against the unseen forces behind them, influencing their actions, using their words, and fueling their hatred. The enemy knows that one of the easiest ways to shake your faith, steal your joy, and distract you from your purpose is to use people to attack you. He will use those closest to you because their words hurt the most. He will use people in positions of authority because their rejection carries more weight. He will use strangers to discourage you, plant seeds of doubt, and make you question yourself. If he cannot stop you directly, he will send others to do his work. And if you are not spiritually discerning, you will waste your energy fighting people instead of recognizing the true enemy behind the attack. Jesus faced this throughout his ministry. The religious leaders opposed him at every turn, trying to trap him with their words, twisting his message, and accusing him of wrongdoing. They could not deny his power, nor could they refute his wisdom. But their hearts were hardened, and they allowed themselves to be used as instruments of attack. Even among his own disciples, the enemy found an opportunity. When Jesus told his followers that he would suffer and die, Peter rebuked him, saying that such a thing should never happen. But Jesus recognized the true source of the words and responded, "Get behind me, Satan." He was not calling Peter the devil. He was addressing the spirit that was influencing him in that moment. This is spiritual discernment. Understanding when the attack is not about the person speaking, but about the spirit behind their words. Judas provides another example. He walked with Jesus, listened to his teachings, and witnessed his miracles. Yet, in the end, he allowed himself to be used as an instrument of betrayal. The Bible tells us that Satan entered into Judas, and from that moment, he set out to betray the Son of God. The enemy needed someone on the inside, someone close to Jesus, to hand him over, and he found that opportunity in a man whose heart had already opened to greed and deception. This is how spiritual attacks unfold. The enemy seeks out weaknesses, open doors, unresolved bitterness, unchecked pride, and uses people who have already given him access to carry out his attacks. Many believers struggle with anger and resentment because they take spiritual attacks personally. They spend years harboring grudges against those who hurt them, not realizing that those people were being used by something far greater than themselves. This is why Jesus could pray for those who crucified him, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." He understood that they were being used. He knew that their actions, as painful as they were part of a larger spiritual battle. He did not waste time hating them because he saw beyond the physical assault to the spiritual war that lay behind it. If you are walking in obedience to God, opposition will come your way. The enemy does not attack those who walk in darkness. He targets those who carry the light. He will send people to distract you, provoke you, test your patience, discourage you, and make you question what God has spoken to you. He will use those closest to you to plant seeds of doubt, to make you feel unworthy, and to stir up conflict in your spirit. If you lack discernment, you will find yourself fighting people instead of recognizing the real battle. You will waste your energy in arguments, frustration, and bitterness instead of standing firm in the truth and resisting the enemy's schemes. The Bible instructs us to put on the full armor of God so that we can stand firm against the enemy's attacks. It does not tell us to fight every person who opposes us. It does not tell us to argue with every critic, to defend ourselves against every false accusation, or to prove ourselves to those who misunderstand us. Instead, it calls us to stand firm, resist the devil, walk in truth, clothe ourselves with righteousness, guard our hearts, and stay in prayer. This is how you face a spiritual attack. Not by fighting the people being used against you, but by standing in the authority that God has given you. Spiritual attacks often come through people, but they do not define you. They do not have the power to stop what God is doing in your life. They cannot cancel your calling. When you recognize the battle for what it is, you stop reacting in the flesh and start responding in the spirit. You stop wasting time explaining yourself, trying to win arguments or proving your worth. You begin to focus on the true fight, the one that is not against flesh and blood, but against the unseen forces working behind the scenes. Guard your peace and your purpose, because the enemy will stop at nothing to take them from you. If he cannot stop you from believing, he will try to make you restless. If he cannot take away your calling, he will try to distract you from it. He knows that a believer who is at peace and walking in their purpose is a threat to his kingdom. That is why he sends people, situations, and thoughts to shake you, to make you doubt, and to pull you away from what God has assigned you to do. Peace is not simply the absence of trouble. It is the presence of God amidst it. It is the kind of peace that allows you to sleep in the storm, stand in the fire, and walk through the valley without fear. It is the kind of peace that Jesus had when he stood before Pilate, falsely accused, yet completely calm. He did not defend himself. He did not argue with his accusers. He did not allow their lies to disturb his spirit. He knew who he was, and he knew that no opposition could change his purpose. That is the peace the enemy wants to take from you. He wants you to live in anxiety, constantly defending yourself, constantly explaining yourself, and always feeling the need to prove yourself. But the moment you give in to that battle, you lose your focus. The enemy does not need to destroy you if he can distract you. If he can keep your mind occupied with things that do not matter, if it can pull you into unnecessary drama, if it can stir conflict in your heart, he can pull you away from your purpose without you even realizing it. That is why you must be cautious about what you allow into your spirit. Be careful about the conversations you engage in, the battles you choose to fight, and the energy you give to things that do not serve your calling. Jesus never allowed distractions to pull him away from his mission. He did not waste time arguing with those who had already decided to reject him. He did not chase after those who walked away from him. He did not try to explain himself to those who had no desire to understand. He remained focused on what God had called him to do. That is the example we are meant to follow. There are people who will try to disturb your peace. They will test you, provoke you, misunderstand you, and lie about you. The enemy will use them to draw you into arguments, to make you react in ways that take your attention off of God. That's why you must protect your peace. You must recognize when a situation is a trap, when a conversation isn't worth having, and when a battle is not yours to fight. Some things are meant to be ignored. Some words are meant to be left unanswered. Some people are meant to be loved from a distance. Guarding your peace is not a sign of weakness. It is a mark of wisdom. It is knowing when to walk away, when to be silent, when to let God handle what you cannot control. It is choosing prayer over retaliation, stillness over restlessness, and faith over the need to prove yourself. The world will tell you to fight every battle, to respond to every critic, to defend yourself against every accusation. But Jesus demonstrated a different way. He showed us that true strength lies not in proving yourself to others, but in placing your trust in God. Your purpose is too important to be derailed by unnecessary battles. The enemy will try to wear you down before you even get to where God is taking you. He will attempt to drain you with distractions, negativity, and discouragement. But you must guard what God has entrusted to you. You must protect your anointing, your time, and your mind. You must be mindful of who you allow to speak into your life, what you meditate on, and what you entertain. Guarding your peace and your purpose means walking in discernment. It means recognizing when the enemy is trying to stir confusion. It means knowing when to be still, when to speak, when to move, and when to wait. It means keeping your focus on God and refusing to let anything or anyone pull you off track. Peace is a weapon. Focus is a weapon. When you refuse to let the enemy steal them from you, you walk in the authority and power that God has given you. Let your life be the answer, not your words, not your explanations, not your defenses. The world is full of questions, questions about faith, truth, and God's power and presence. People will challenge you. They will question your beliefs. They will demand proof. They will seek explanations. But the greatest response to all of this is not an argument. It is a life that reflects God's presence. Jesus did not waste time trying to persuade people whose hearts were already hardened. He did not chase after the Pharisees, begging them to believe. He did not argue with every critic who doubted his authority. He simply lived the truth. He healed the sick, raised the dead, and set the captives free. His actions answered every question. His life was the proof. That is the calling we share. We are not called to waste our time convincing those who refuse to see. We are called to walk in such a way that our very lives provide the answers to the world's questions. There will be people who demand explanations for your faith. They will ask why you trust in a God you cannot see. They will challenge your belief in His promises when life becomes difficult. They will mock your obedience when you follow God's voice, even when it doesn't make sense to them. But explanations will never satisfy those who do not wish to believe. Words can be twisted. Arguments can be ignored. But a life that bears the fruit of faith cannot be denied. When you walk in peace amidst the storms, when you remain steadfast through trials, when you love those who hate you, when you live with joy despite your circumstances, your life becomes the answer that no one can refute. The disciples did not convince the world through debates. They changed it by the way they lived. They were beaten, imprisoned, rejected, and persecuted, but they did not waver. They did not waste time explaining themselves to those who had already made up their minds. They simply lived their faith, and because of that, the power of God moved through them. That is why people took notice. That is why the church grew. That is why the gospel spread. Not because they had the perfect argument, but because they provided the evidence of a life surrendered to God. When Paul stood before kings and rulers, he did not beg them to believe. He testified of what God had done in his life. He did not try to prove his calling. He simply lived it. And even when they mocked him, even when they rejected his message, the power of his life spoke louder than their disbelief. That is the example we are to follow. Live in such a way that people cannot deny God's presence in you. Walk in such a way that even those who doubt will see the truth through your actions. Let the peace you carry be your testimony. Let the way you love be your evidence. Let the way you endure trials be the answer to the world's questions. The enemy wants you to waste your time defending yourself. He seeks to entangle you in arguments, explaining yourself repeatedly, trying to make people understand what they have already chosen to reject. But that is not your battle. You are not called to convince. You are called to reflect. You are called to walk in such a way that your life leaves no doubt about the God you serve. When you live in obedience, when you remain steadfast, when you stay focused on your purpose, your life becomes the answer. Your fruit speaks louder than any argument. Your faithfulness is proof enough. The world does not need more explanations. It needs more evidence. And that evidence is a life surrendered to God. The world will always have questions. People will challenge your faith, misunderstand your journey, and demand explanations for what God is doing in your life. But the greatest response is not found in arguments or justifications. It is found in the way you live. When you walk in faith, when you guard your peace, when you refuse to engage in battles that are not yours, when you recognize spiritual attacks for what they are, and when you trust God above human approval, your life itself becomes the answer. Jesus did not waste time defending himself to those who had already chosen unbelief. He let his work speak for him. He stayed focused on his mission, unmoved by distractions, undisturbed by opposition. That is the example we are meant to follow. The enemy will try to shake you, to pull you into unnecessary battles, to make you restless and distracted. But when you stand firm in faith, when you walk in obedience without seeking validation, when you guard your peace and stay committed to your purpose, nothing can stop what God has placed inside of you. Let your life reflect his presence. Let your actions speak louder than words. Let the peace you carry, the purpose you walk in, and the faith you display be the undeniable evidence of the God you serve. You do not need to explain yourself to those who refuse to see. Keep walking, keep trusting, keep living in such a way that leaves no doubt about who is leading you. Your life will be the